Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to this lecture where we are looking at the second portion of Judaism, which focuses on the kingdom period to the modern day state of Israel, essentially kind of a fast-paced look through history. And I have down here below the Star of David the statement from Rabbi Hillel, "You shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. The rest is merely explanation." Rabbi Hillel explaining the Torah to a Gentile, a non-Jew. The story regarding this here is Rabbi Hillel was a prominent rabbi in the first century BCE. His opposing school would have been the Shammai school, but regardless of which, Judea, Israel, was under the occupancy of the Romans, and the story is that a Roman soldier, a Gentile, a non-Jew, approached Rabbi Hillel and stated, "If you can explain to me the entire Torah or law while standing on one foot, I'll convert to Judaism." Now, what the soldier was probably expecting, or wanting maybe more specifically, would be for Rabbi Hillel to try to stand on one foot and explain all 613 commandments of the Torah or the law. The 10 commandments are just but 10 of the 613, and modern-day Jews cannot practice all of the 613 because a lot of them relate to the temple system, the temple cult, and there is no longer a temple. But Rabbi Hillel instead stood on one foot and made this statement, "You shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. The rest is merely explanation." That essentially is what summarizes the Torah, the law. I don't know if the would-be soldier converted to Judaism or not. But in any case, this is going to be a little bit different from how I teach this portion in my seated class, mostly to try to get the timing down a bit. But it will still cover, the pertinent information. So kind of starting off here, you don't need to write this down here, the kings of the United Kingdom of Israel, and the image here on the screen is of King David, the legendary king, pointing down to his son and heir Solomon, and that's taken from the Church of St. Mary Major, prominent church in Rome. But you have here Saul, David, Solomon, and then Rehoboam. But what you do need to write down here is that until the beginnings of the monarchy period, what is in the Hebrew Bible is in the area of history and legend. So why is it in the area of history and legend? Well, simply put, we don't have any outside information to verify the events. But even somewhat here, with what's on the screen, there's a little bit of that history and legend, and you notice I have asterisks there, by the dates. Well, in the case with Saul, these dates come from later, essentially, rabbinical commentary. In the Hebrew Bible, more specifically in 1 Samuel, the king books traditionally, 1 Samuel to 2 Kings, and older Bibles, those books are sometimes listed as 1st through 4th Kings. But in any case, in the earliest manuscripts that we have of the Hebrew Bible and of those king books, it states literally that Saul became king when he was a year old and that he reigned for 2 years. Well, obviously a copyist corrupted the original text. And more than likely, the reason why is because Saul was a failed king, and David, of course, was a good king. David, and I'll focus on him a little bit more here in just a moment, but in terms of, the asterisks with him and his son and heir Solomon, you have approximately 40 years there. And of course, this comes from a culture where the number 40 is sometimes, used for more of a symbolic reference than a literal reference. And in the case with Rehoboam, the reason why there's an asterisk there is because he was the particular king when the United Kingdom comes to an end. And we'll focus on that in just a moment. But I want to say something a little bit here with King David, and kind of maybe adding into, still this area of history and legend. David, to the Deuteronomic historians, those who produced the King books, which in many contemporary Bibles are 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. Older Bibles sometimes will list them as 1st through 4th Kings, but in any case we're talking about the same text here. David is essentially portrayed as the most important person for the Jewish people, or we could perhaps still stay here, the Israelites, after Moses. He is described as the great warrior, poet, musician, king. Well, there were nations outside of Israel. Basically, Israel had its neighbors. Well, what did they say about, David? Well, the short answer is that they said nothing. Now, I kind of make a little bit of a comparison with David, and I guess you could say this even maybe with Solomon too, but I'm going to stick with David, and, the Emperor of Japan. Because as we saw with Shintoism, the Emperor of Japan, until the end of the Second World War, was looked upon as being a living god. Well, what did, Westerners say, for example, about this person that, the Japanese people considered to be a living god? Well, until the middle part of the 19th century, they said pretty much nothing. Because, while the Japanese people saw their emperor as a living god, outside nations, in this case Westerners, did not. So I'd say it's very similar here with David, that, the Israelites, the Jewish people, saw David as this, great warrior, poet, musician, king, but outside nations didn't. Now, mentioning something more about David, there was discovered in about the mid-1990s, this stone that's referred to as the Teldan stone. It dates from around the 9th century BCE, and there is a reference to David, more specifically the house of David. So, you had to have had a David to have built the house. But what did it say really about David? Well, David himself, nothing other than that a person that built a house, a royal dynasty. But in terms of, the characteristics, like what you find in the king books of, the warrior, poet, musician, king, none of that. So even here, you could perhaps still have a little bit of that history and legend. So, turning now to the divided kingdom and the destruction. Well, around the year 930 BCE or BC, the United Kingdom of Israel divides into two factions, where you have in the north the kingdom that would still be called Israel, and its capital being at Samaria. And then in the south, you have the kingdom that's called Judea, with its capital remaining there in Jerusalem, which was the capital of the United Kingdom. And this is where the people whom we call the Jews derive their name from, the people of Judea. So, what exactly caused this division? Well, according to the Deuteronomic historians, those who produced the king books of the Hebrew Bible, the first two books of Samuel and the first two books of Kings, which in older Bibles are listed as 1st through 4th Kings, the reason for this division is because Solomon lost divine favor. That one of the many wives of Solomon caused him to commit idolatry, that is, worshiping another god other than his own. And God informs Solomon that because of what he has done, he is going to take the kingdom away from him, divide it up. Not in his lifetime, though, because of how much he loved, his servant, in this case Solomon's father David, but it would happen, with Solomon's successor. And that successor was Rehoboam. Well, here's the deal. From a historical point of view, we cannot prove such things. We can only prove what is in harmony with the natural world. So we can't prove things like loss or gain of divine favor. Now, within the text, there is something described there that is in harmony with the natural world, but that's not what the Deuteronomic historians want you to see as the reason behind the division. But in any case, Solomon builds the temple in Jerusalem, and this is what is known as First Temple Period Judaism. Well, the southern portion of the kingdom benefits from that. It benefits, in terms of people coming into the south to take part in the many, you could say, like high festivals of the year, and they come there and they spend money. They take some souvenirs, or, they get a room at the inn, or, they go out to eat. But basically, they spend money, and the southern portion benefits from this. And that really doesn't, help the north out. So representatives from the north come down to Jerusalem, the capital, and basically ask Rehoboam to make the situation better for them. Rehoboam responds with the great diplomatic answer of no, and that's when essentially, representatives in the north, representing 10 tribes, state, well, we're done. And the kingdom is divided into two factions. Well, we're going to need to stop here, but then when we come back, we will continue on with this lecture over the second portion of Judaism. So take care. I will symbolically see you then.